The morning broke gray and humid across the western Pacific as radar operators hunched over their glowing screens aboard the American carriers. It was June 19, 1944, and Task Force 58 had positioned itself roughly 200 miles west of the Mariana Islands, a massive concentration of naval power that represented America's commitment to ending Japanese domination of Asian waters. 15 fleet carriers rode the swells with their supporting cruisers and destroyers, a floating city of steel and aviation fuel containing 905 aircraft poised for combat. Vice Admiral Marc Mitscher commanded this armada from his flagship USS Lexington, a man who understood that modern naval warfare had become the province of pilots and engineers rather than admirals and battleships. In the ready rooms of the American carriers, pilots reviewed their briefings with the casual professionalism of men who had trained for this moment their entire military careers. The F6F Hellcat fighters they would fly represented the culmination of American industrial design philosophy, not the fastest or most maneuverable aircraft, but rather a carefully engineered machine that protected its pilot, delivered overwhelming firepower, and performed predictably across a wide envelope of flight conditions. These were aircraft built for average pilots to achieve extraordinary results, machines that forgave mistakes rather than punishing them. The Hellcat specifications reflected lessons learned through 2 years of bitter Pacific warfare. Its airframe could absorb tremendous battle damage that would have destroyed earlier American fighters. 212 pounds of armor plate surrounded the pilot, protecting against both machine gun fire and fragmentation. The bulletproof windscreen, 1.5 inches of laminated glass, could stop Japanese 7.7mm rounds at point-blank range. The self-sealing fuel tanks prevented catastrophic fires from enemy gunfire, a feature born from watching too many American pilots burn to death in the sky. 6 50-caliber Browning machine guns, each carrying 400 rounds, provided firepower that could tear through enemy aircraft with devastating efficiency. The Pratt and Whitney R-2800 double wasp engine produced 2,000 horsepower, nearly double the power available to Japanese fighters, translating into superior climb rate, acceleration, and high-altitude performance that the thin air at 24,000 feet made increasingly critical. Across the Philippine Sea, Japanese pilots prepared for what their commanders promised would be a decisive blow against American invaders threatening the Saipan operation. The Japanese Navy had committed 3 carriers, Taiho, Shokaku, and Zuikaku, along with supporting vessels to this battle. These ships carried over 430 aircraft, but the composition of the air groups revealed Japan's desperate situation. The veteran pilots like Lieutenant Junior Grade Taeshi Yamamoto, who had accumulated over 600 combat hours since 1941 and had flown missions over the Dutch East Indies and Rabaul, represented an endangered species. They would be shepherding replacement pilots fresh from abbreviated training programs, young men like Ensign Hiroshi Tanaka, who had received just 75 hours of flight training before being thrust into combat. The contrast between the two sides' pilot training programs illustrated the fundamental asymmetry that would determine the battle's outcome. American naval aviators received approximately 505 hours of flying time before operational deployment, including 150 hours in combat aircraft types. They trained extensively in gunnery, formation flying, and energy management tactics. Experienced instructors rotated from frontline squadrons back to training units, ensuring that new pilots learned from hard-won combat experience. By contrast, Japanese replacement pilots graduated with barely 40 hours of flying time. Fuel shortages forced elimination of advanced combat training. Ammunition scarcity limited gunnery practice to static ground targets. Most Japanese pilots had never fired their weapons at moving aerial targets before entering combat. The abbreviated 6-month training program compressed what previously required 3 years of peacetime instruction into a desperate rush to replace mounting losses. Aboard Taiho, Admiral Jizaburo Ozawa reviewed his operational plan. The first wave would launch 69 aircraft, 4 8-0s, 16 Judy dive bombers, and 5 Jill torpedo bombers. The second wave, scheduled for launch at 08:56 hours, would comprise 128 aircraft, including 48 Zero fighters, 53 dive bombers, and 27 torpedo bombers. Ozawa believed the sheer numbers combined with the Zero's legendary maneuverability would overwhelm American defenses. The doctrine underlying his plan emerged from Japan's successful operations in 1941 and 1942 against Pearl Harbor, Darwin, and other targets. Commander Minoru Genda had developed tactics that maximized the Zero's exceptional maneuverability and range advantages against Allied opposition. A skilled pilot could dominate aerial engagements through superior positioning and energy management, regardless of numerical disadvantage. This philosophy had served Japan well through the war's early years. It had become, in many ways, the foundation of Japanese naval aviation's self-image. What Japanese planners had not adequately considered was that their aircraft had been designed before the Hellcat emerged, and the Hellcat had been designed specifically to counter the Zero. Grumman engineers had studied captured specimens and pilot reports meticulously. They had made deliberate choices about how to fight the Japanese fighter. Rather than attempting to match the Zero's turning radius, they designed an aircraft that could outclimb, out-accelerate, and out-dive it. Rather than relying on armor-piercing shells of limited quantity, they packed 6 machine guns firing 850 rounds per minute each. Rather than protecting pilots through superior maneuverability, they surrounded them with armor and self-sealing tanks. Every design decision represented a philosophical choice about how to win a shooting match against an opponent who had dominated Pacific skies just 2 years earlier. At 07:30 hours, Lieutenant Warrant Officer Sakio Kamatsu adjusted his flight suit in Taiho's ready room, preparing to fly escort for the second attack wave. His aircraft carried a centerline drop tank extending range to over 1,000 nautical miles, transforming the nimble fighter into a long-range escort platform. The briefing had emphasized maximum strike force against American carriers detected east of Guam. Intelligence reports indicated 15 large flat tops operating in 3 task groups southwest of Saipan. The Japanese pilots believed they were approaching a vulnerable enemy fleet caught in the open ocean, unaware that they were flying toward one of the most sophisticated integrated air defense systems yet developed. American radar operators aboard USS Yorktown detected the incoming Japanese formation at 150 miles distance, providing approximately 20 minutes of advance warning before visual contact. This technological advantage transformed aerial defense from reactive scrambling to coordinated interception with altitude and positional advantages carefully calculated by trained officers. Fighter director officers vectored combat air patrol fighters toward specific intercept coordinates using precise radar plotting. Each carrier maintained a combat information center, where trained officers tracked all airborne contacts using radar displays. Radio communications linked directors with airborne fighters, providing real-time tactical guidance throughout engagements. This centralized control maximized defensive efficiency by concentrating fighters at optimal intercept points, rather than scattering them across the sky in desperate response to enemy appearance. Commander David McCampbell led VF-15's 1st Division from USS Essex, climbing toward the incoming raid at military power. His 12 Hellcats maintained tight formation while following radar vectors toward their assigned targets. Each pilot averaged over 300 hours of flight time with extensive gunnery and tactical training completed stateside. The American training program had expanded dramatically throughout 1943, producing 10,000 new naval aviators annually. McCampbell and his pilots represented the cutting edge of this expansion, professionals who had been trained to operate as a coordinated team rather than as individual warriors seeking personal glory. The first engagement occurred at EO 95 hours, approximately 90 miles west of Guam. American fighters attacked from above and behind, using their altitude advantage for high-speed diving passes that exploited the Hellcat's superior engine power. Ensign Tanaka, the young Japanese pilot with just 75 hours of flying time, broke left, attempting to force an overshoot. But the Hellcat followed his turn with surprising agility. The American fighter's superior power allowed sustained turning at speeds where the Zero's controls became heavy and unresponsive. Multiple .50 caliber rounds struck Tanaka's aircraft, severing control cables and puncturing fuel tanks that immediately ignited. The Zero's lack of armor protection proved catastrophic. The armor-piercing incendiary rounds penetrated the thin aluminum structure, and when flames reached the wing fuel tanks, the aircraft exploded. This shocking destruction contradicted everything Japanese pilots believed about their aircraft's combat superiority. The psychological impact spread through the formation as pilots witnessed their fighters destroyed with apparent ease. McCampbell's division executed coordinated slashing attacks against the Japanese formation using superior speed and firepower. The Hellcats dove from 28,000 feet, reaching 450 miles per hour in their attack runs before zooming back to altitude. This energy-based tactical approach negated the Zero's maneuverability advantage while exploiting its inferior high-speed handling characteristics. The Japanese pilots attempted traditional turning engagements but could not force the Americans into sustained dogfights. Each Hellcat pilot maintained strict energy discipline, refusing to engage in low-speed turning battles where Zeros excelled. The Americans demonstrated remarkable teamwork, with wingmen protecting leaders during attack runs while maintaining mutual support throughout the engagement. The Hellcat's robust radio equipment enabled clear communications despite electromagnetic interference from dozens of simultaneous transmissions. Japanese pilots struggled with inferior radio systems that produced static and feedback, preventing effective tactical coordination. Many Zero pilots disabled their radios entirely due to constant interference, relying on hand signals and pre-briefed formations. This communication breakdown compounded tactical disadvantages as Japanese formations fragmented under coordinated American attacks. The first engagement ended with severe Japanese losses, as 12 Zeros fell to Hellcat guns within 8 minutes. American pilots observed multiple characteristics that contradicted intelligence estimates of enemy capabilities. The Japanese fighters demonstrated poor gunnery, with most bursts passing harmlessly behind intended targets. Their evasive maneuvers followed predictable patterns, suggesting inadequate combat training and limited tactical repertoire. Several Japanese pilots abandoned advantageous positions through apparent confusion or inexperience, failing to exploit brief opportunities when Hellcats presented vulnerable aspects. Lieutenant Alexander Vracu from VF-16 aboard Lexington intercepted a second Japanese formation attempting to penetrate the fighter screen. His section of 4 Hellcats engaged 12 enemy aircraft with devastating effectiveness, shooting down 6 planes in 8 minutes. Vracu expended only 360 rounds of his 2,400-round ammunition load, demonstrating the effectiveness of American gunnery training. The concentrated firepower of 50 caliber guns proved overwhelming against the Zero's fragile structure. Short bursts produced immediate catastrophic damage, with wings separating, engines exploding, and fuel tanks igniting from incendiary rounds. The technological disparity became increasingly apparent as the battle developed throughout the morning. Hellcats absorbed multiple hits from Japanese 7.7mm machine guns without significant damage, while their own weapons destroyed Zeros with minimal ammunition expenditure. American pilots reported enemy aircraft disintegrating under concentrated fire, often exploding after just 2 or 3 seconds of accurate shooting. The Zero's 20mm cannons posed a theoretical threat, but low muzzle velocity and limited ammunition reduced their practical effectiveness. Most Japanese pilots exhausted their cannon ammunition quickly through poor fire discipline, leaving only rifle-caliber machine guns for subsequent engagements. Radar-directed fighter control enabled efficient vector management as American fighters intercepted multiple incoming waves. The fighter direction officers maintained complete tactical awareness through radar tracking and pilot reports, positioning fresh fighters at optimal intercept points. This systematic defense prevented Japanese formations from coordinating mass attacks against the carrier force. Individual Japanese groups arrived piecemeal, encountering concentrated Hellcat formations positioned for maximum tactical advantage. The raiders suffered progressive attrition before reaching effective attack range of American vessels. Vice Admiral Ozawa launched his second wave at 0856 hours, comprising 128 aircraft from all available carriers. The strike included 48 Zero fighters, 53 Judy dive bombers, and 27 Jill torpedo bombers tasked with overwhelming American defenses through sheer numbers. However, the inexperienced pilots struggled with basic navigation as formations fragmented during the long approach flight. Several groups became lost entirely, wandering aimlessly while consuming precious fuel reserves before finding their targets. Lieutenant Russell Reiser from VF-31 aboard USS Cabot intercepted the second wave's leading elements 60 miles from the task force. His division of Hellcats attacked from upsun, achieving complete tactical surprise against the enemy formation. The Japanese pilots failed to maintain proper lookout doctrine, allowing the Americans to approach undetected until opening fire. Within minutes, 5 enemy aircraft spiraled toward the ocean, trailing smoke and flames from catastrophic structural damage. The surviving Japanese aircraft attempted to continue their attack run, but encountered successive Hellcat formations positioned at different altitudes. Each American interception followed similar patterns with diving attacks from superior altitude, followed by zoom climbs back to perch positions. The Hellcats maintained energy advantage throughout engagements, dictating combat terms while denying Japanese pilots opportunities for effective retaliation. The second wave's attack on Task Force 58 achieved minimal results as survivors penetrated the fighter screen in scattered groups. Anti-aircraft fire from screening destroyers and cruisers created dense barrage patterns that further dispersed attacking formations. The few Japanese aircraft reaching the carriers encountered concentrated defensive fire from multiple vessels firing proximity, fused shells. Only one torpedo bomber successfully launched its weapon, which USS Indiana easily evaded through timely maneuvering. Commander McCampbell led VF-15's second strike, encountering the third Japanese wave at 1100 hours. His formation of 12 Hellcats engaged over 40 enemy aircraft in a running battle lasting 20 minutes. McCampbell personally destroyed 7 Japanese planes, while his wingman Lieutenant Roy Rushing accounted for 4 additional victories. The engagement demonstrated the cumulative effect of American training advantages as experienced pilots exploited every enemy mistake. Japanese formations dissolved into individual aircraft maneuvering defensively, abandoning their attack mission to survive overwhelming fighter opposition. Lieutenant Commander Kenji Suzuki observed the third wave's destruction from his damaged Zero struggling back toward the Japanese fleet. His aircraft bore multiple 50-caliber holes through wings and fuselage with one elevator cable severed and the engine running rough. The severe losses exceeded anything experienced in previous carrier battles, including Midway, where at least some aircraft successfully attacked enemy ships. Today's operations achieved virtually nothing, while losing dozens of aircraft and irreplaceable pilots to enemy fighters. The intelligence failure became apparent as returning pilots reported encountering an entirely new American fighter with unprecedented performance characteristics. Previous intelligence estimates based on captured F-4F Wildcats suggested American fighters remained inferior to updated Zero variants in all performance parameters except diving speed. The Hellcat's ability to outclimb, outturn at high speed, and absorb tremendous damage contradicted every assumption underlying Japanese tactical planning. The enemy fighter appeared purpose, built to exploit every Zero weakness while negating its traditional advantages. Aboard Taiho, Admiral Ozawa received fragmentary reports indicating catastrophic losses among all three attack waves. Surviving pilots described overwhelming fighter opposition, with American aircraft appearing at every altitude and direction. The coordinated defensive system prevented concentration of attacking forces while achieving disproportionate attrition against Japanese formations. Radio intercepts suggested American losses remained minimal despite engaging superior numbers of Japanese aircraft throughout the morning's operations. Air operations officers aboard the Japanese carriers tallied the mounting casualties as aircraft failed to return from their missions. The first wave launched 69 aircraft, but only 27 returned to their carriers, with many bearing significant battle damage. The second wave suffered even worse, with barely one-third of 180 aircraft surviving the American fighter gauntlet. These losses represented not just aircraft, but irreplaceable pilots whose training required years of peacetime development. The implications extended beyond immediate tactical defeat to strategic collapse of Japanese naval aviation capability. The returning pilots exhibited signs of severe psychological trauma from their encounter with American fighters. Young aviators who graduated training just weeks earlier described terror and helplessness facing an enemy that seemed invulnerable to their attacks. Their 7.7mm machine guns appeared completely ineffective, while American 50s tore their aircraft apart with devastating efficiency. The myth of the Zero's invincibility shattered completely as pilots witnessed squadron mates destroyed without opportunity for effective resistance. Veteran pilots like Yamamoto struggled to comprehend the reversal of aerial superiority they enjoyed throughout the war's early years. The tactical methods developed through successful campaigns in China, Southeast Asia, and the Pacific no longer functioned against this new American fighter. Years of combat experience became meaningless when the enemy refused engagement on terms where Japanese pilots excelled. The psychological foundation of Japanese naval aviation, built on technical superiority and pilot skill, crumbled in a single morning's combat. Morale aboard Japanese carriers plummeted as maintenance crews counted empty parking spots where aircraft should have returned. The flight decks designed to operate 75 aircraft each now held scattered remnants of once powerful air groups. Mechanics and armorers who prepared aircraft for the morning strikes stood idle with no machines to service or weapons to load. The human dimension of defeat became apparent as friends and squadmates failed to return from what promised to be a decisive victory. Admiral Ozawa contemplated the implications of continuing operations with drastically reduced air groups. The fourth wave of 82 aircraft prepared for launch, but reconnaissance reports indicated the American carriers maintained full combat capability despite 3 mass attacks. The sacrifice of additional pilots and aircraft seemed pointless against an enemy that demonstrated overwhelming tactical and technical superiority. Yet withdrawal abandoned the Saipan garrison and acknowledged defeat in what Japanese planners considered the decisive battle for Pacific supremacy. The communication breakdown between senior commanders and flying personnel became critical as accurate battle assessment proved impossible. Surviving pilots provided conflicting reports about enemy strength and capabilities, while staff officers struggled to compile coherent tactical analysis. The traditional Japanese emphasis on spiritual determination over material factors prevented honest evaluation of American advantages. Many commanders refused to acknowledge that enemy fighters could so completely dominate their naval aviators regardless of numerical superiority. The Hellcat's dominance stemmed from comprehensive design advantages addressing every aspect of aerial combat. The Pratt and Whitney R-2800 double wasp engine produced 2,000 horsepower, nearly double the Zero's 1,020 horsepower Sakai 21 engine. This power advantage translated into superior climb rate, acceleration, and high-altitude performance. The Hellcat climbed at 3,500 feet per minute compared to the Zero's 2,600 feet per minute, enabling American pilots to maintain energy advantage throughout engagements. The Hellcat's armament of 650 caliber Browning machine guns with an ample loadout of 400 rounds per gun delivered devastating firepower with excellent ballistic characteristics. Each gun fired 850 rounds per minute with a muzzle velocity of 2,900 feet per second, maintaining flat trajectory and hitting power at combat ranges. The total firepower exceeded 100 rounds per second of armor-piercing incendiary ammunition capable of penetrating engine blocks and igniting fuel tanks. The ammunition supply provided 30 seconds of sustained fire, allowing multiple engagement opportunities without ammunition conservation concerns. The Zero's armament combined two 20mm Type 99 cannons with two 7.7mm Type 97 machine guns, presenting theoretical firepower advantages through explosive cannon shells. However, the cannon's low muzzle velocity of 2,460 feet per second created significant trajectory drop, requiring different aiming points from machine guns. Limited ammunition of 60 rounds per cannon forced pilots to conserve fire, reducing practical rate of fire during extended engagements. The 7.7mm machine guns lacked stopping power against armored American fighters, while their 700 rounds per gun could not compensate for inadequate penetration capability. American radar technology provided decisive tactical advantages through early warning and fighter direction capabilities. The SK air search radar detected aircraft at 100-mile range, while SM height-finding radar determined altitude within 500 feet accuracy. This information fed into combat information centers where trained officers plotted all contacts on vertical display boards. Fighter director officers vectored defending fighters using VHF radio equipment, providing clear communications despite atmospheric interference. The integrated system transformed aerial defense from individual pilot initiative to coordinated tactical operations, maximizing defensive efficiency. Japanese carriers lacked effective radar systems, with most vessels relying on visual observation for air defense coordination. The Type 21 air search radar installed on some carriers provided only 60-mile detection range with poor reliability and frequent false contacts. Without height-finding capability or integrated fighter direction, Japanese combat air patrols operated independently using pre-war tactical doctrine. The absence of centralized control prevented efficient fighter allocation against multiple incoming raids while limiting tactical flexibility during engagements. By late 1944, a new Japanese Navy pilot graduated with just 40 hours of flying time, while his American opponent had at least 525 hours of flying time. American pilots averaged extensive gunnery training with camera guns recording accuracy during simulated combat. Formation tactics received equal emphasis with pilots learning energy management, mutual support, and section tactics during advanced training. Operational training units provided realistic combat preparation using experienced instructors rotating from frontline squadrons. Japanese replacement pilots averaged just 100 hours of total flight time with minimal combat training before operational deployment. The fuel shortage forced reliance on ground instruction and limited flying hours in obsolete training aircraft. Most pilots never fired weapons at aerial targets before entering combat, while formation flying emphasized parade ground precision over tactical flexibility. The abbreviated training program eliminated aerobatics, instrument flying, and night operations considered essential in the pre-war curriculum. The qualitative difference in pilot capability magnified aircraft performance disparities throughout aerial engagements. The fourth Japanese wave launched despite mounting evidence of catastrophic losses among earlier strikes. Admiral Ozawa committed his remaining 82 aircraft, hoping to achieve some damage against American carriers before withdrawing westward. However, these aircraft encountered even more intense fighter opposition as American carriers recovered, refueled, and relaunched their combat air patrols. The systematic destruction continued with mechanical precision as Hellcats positioned at multiple altitudes engaged each incoming group. By 1430 hours, American search aircraft located the Japanese fleet 275 miles northwest of Task Force 58. Admiral Mitscher launched a maximum effort strike of 206 aircraft, despite the extreme range requiring careful fuel management. The American strike included 85 Hellcat fighters, demonstrating offensive capability beyond pure fleet defense roles. While Japanese carriers struggled to maintain minimal defensive patrols with surviving aircraft, American carriers surged overwhelming offensive power. The role reversal from morning's defensive success to afternoon offensive operations showcased American operational superiority. The American strike found Japanese carriers virtually defenseless, with only 35 operational fighters remaining from over 400 aircraft available that morning. Hellcat fighters swept aside token opposition, while dive bombers and torpedo planes attacked without significant interference. The carrier Hyo sank after multiple torpedo hits, while Zuikaku and Chiyoda suffered severe damage from bomb strikes. Japanese anti-aircraft fire proved ineffective against coordinated attacks pressed home with determination by experienced American pilots. The return flight occurred after sunset, creating navigation challenges as pilots struggled to locate their carriers in darkness. Admiral Mitscher made the unprecedented decision to illuminate his carriers despite submarine threats, turning on searchlights and deck lights to guide returning aircraft. This calculated risk prioritized aircrew recovery over ship security, demonstrating American confidence in their tactical position. Despite losing 80 aircraft to fuel exhaustion and night landing accidents, personnel recovery reached 85% as destroyers rescued pilots from the water. The operational tempo continued as carriers prepared for dawn searches to locate the retreating Japanese fleet. Admiral Ozawa's withdrawal acknowledged complete defeat with only 35 operational aircraft remaining from 430 embarked that morning. The Japanese fleet that entered battle expecting decisive victory retreated, having accomplished nothing beyond confirming American aerial supremacy. The loss ratio exceeded 10-1 in favor of American forces, with Japanese naval aviation effectively eliminated as an offensive force. The implications extended beyond immediate tactical defeat, as Japan lacked resources to rebuild carrier air groups before American forces approached the home islands. The Battle of the Philippine Sea demonstrated that technological superiority combined with superior training could completely negate enemy tactical doctrine regardless of determination or experience. Japanese naval aviation built its reputation on superior aircraft and extensively trained pilots, achieving decisive victories throughout 1941 to 1942. The Zero fighter dominated every opponent through exceptional maneuverability and range, while pilots accumulated combat experience across multiple campaigns. The Hellcat's introduction reversed this dynamic completely through purpose-built design specifically countering Japanese advantages. American designers accepted weight penalties for armor and self-sealing tanks, creating an aircraft that survived damage that destroyed Zeros instantly. The powerful engine provided performance margins, allowing pilots to dictate engagement terms while avoiding situations where Zeros excelled. The massive firepower of 50-caliber guns overwhelmed Japanese aircraft structures designed for minimum weight rather than battle damage resistance. The American training system's expansion demonstrated industrial-age warfare's triumph over craftsman tradition. While Japan struggled to train hundreds of replacement pilots using abbreviated programs, America trained thousands using systematic curriculum developed through operational analysis. The assembly line approach to pilot production achieved consistent quality through standardized instruction and extensive flying hours. Each American pilot represented an interchangeable component in the naval aviation system, rather than an irreplaceable individual whose loss crippled unit effectiveness. The radar-directed fighter control system exemplified technological force multiplication beyond individual aircraft capabilities. The ability to position fighters optimally before visual contact negated Japanese tactical surprise while maximizing defensive efficiency. This systematic approach to aerial defense transformed carrier task forces from vulnerable targets to nearly impregnable fortresses against conventional air attack. The integration of sensors, communications, and command functions created synergistic capabilities exceeding the sum of individual components. Japanese naval doctrine's failure to adapt to changing circumstances proved fatal when pre-war assumptions encountered wartime reality. The emphasis on offensive operations using carrier aviation, achieving decisive victory through single engagements, became irrelevant against an enemy that refused such terms. American forces accepted gradual attrition through sustained operations rather than seeking climactic battles for theater supremacy. This operational patience, combined with industrial superiority, guaranteed eventual victory regardless of individual engagement outcomes. The human cost extended beyond aircraft and pilots to institutional knowledge accumulated through years of training and combat experience. Japan's pre-war naval aviators represented an elite cadre whose skills required extensive development through rigorous selection and training. Their loss could not be replaced through abbreviated wartime programs that produced pilots with minimal competence rather than excellence. The qualitative decline became self-reinforcing as inexperienced pilots suffered disproportionate losses, further degrading overall force effectiveness. Task Force 58 continued operations off Saipan despite Japanese attempts to disrupt the invasion through carrier aviation. The morning of June 20th brought renewed searches for the retreating Japanese fleet while maintaining defensive patrols against potential land-based attacks. American pilots who survived yesterday's combat described it as just like an old-time turkey shoot, giving the battle its enduring nickname. The term captured both the one-sided nature of aerial combat and the mechanical efficiency of destroying Japanese aircraft. The final tally revealed the catastrophic scale of Japanese defeat, with 445 aircraft destroyed, including 95 carrier planes and approximately 50 land-based aircraft. American losses totaled 133 aircraft, with 80 falling to operational accidents rather than enemy action. Only 43 American planes fell to Japanese fighters and anti-aircraft fire during 2 days of intense aerial combat. The 10-to-1 exchange ratio exceeded any previous carrier battle, including the decisive American victory at Midway. More significantly, Japan lost over 400 pilots, including instructors recalled from training units representing the last reservoir of experienced naval aviators. Admiral Ozawa's report to Combined Fleet Headquarters acknowledged the effective destruction of Japanese carrier aviation as an offensive force. The surviving carriers possessed ships and aircraft, but lacked trained pilots capable of conducting effective operations against American forces. The mobile fleet that sortied expecting to achieve decisive victory returned having demonstrated only American aerial supremacy. The strategic implications became apparent as American forces continued advancing toward Japan without meaningful aerial opposition from the Imperial Navy. The technological revolution in naval warfare demonstrated at Philippine Sea influenced post-war aviation development worldwide. The integration of radar, communications, and fighter control established patterns followed by every major Navy seeking carrier aviation capability. The emphasis on pilot survivability through aircraft protection and systematic training became standard practice, replacing pre-war acceptance of attrition. The Hellcat itself continued serving through the Korean War, adapted for ground attack missions that exploited its robust construction and heavy armament. American industrial superiority ultimately proved decisive through quantity and quality advantages that overwhelmed Japanese forces regardless of tactical innovation or individual courage. The ability to produce thousands of aircraft monthly while training pilots to operate them effectively created insurmountable numerical superiority. Each American loss could be replaced multiple times, while Japanese losses became permanent degradation of combat capability. The production statistics revealed the hopelessness of Japan's position. America produced 96,000 aircraft in 1944, while Japan managed only 28,000, despite total national mobilization. The F6F Hellcat achieved the highest kill ratio of any American fighter with 5,223 confirmed victories against 270 losses in aerial combat. This 19-to-1 ratio exceeded every other aircraft type, while accounting for 75% of all Navy aerial victories despite entering service halfway through the war. The Hellcat validated the design philosophy, prioritizing pilot survival and firepower over pure performance metrics. Veterans consistently praised the Hellcat's forgiving flight characteristics and ability to absorb battle damage while maintaining combat effectiveness. Japanese naval aviation never recovered from the Marianas disaster, relegated to desperate kamikaze attacks that sacrificed pilots and aircraft for minimal strategic impact. The institutional knowledge accumulated through decades of development disappeared in a single day's combat against superior American forces. The Zero fighter that symbolized Japanese aerial supremacy became synonymous with obsolescence and vulnerability against modern American fighters. The psychological impact extended beyond military defeat to national recognition that spiritual determination could not overcome material inferiority against industrial democracy's arsenal. The Battle of the Philippine Sea represented the culmination of American naval aviation development from Pearl Harbor's disaster through methodical construction of overwhelming superiority. The carrier task forces that Japan attacked in 1941, hoping to eliminate American Pacific presence, returned multiplied tenfold with superior aircraft, pilots, and tactical doctrine. The transformation from desperate defense to offensive supremacy occurred through systematic application of industrial resources, technological innovation, and operational analysis. The Hellcat fighter embodied this evolution from reactive response to Japanese initiative toward purposeful dominance through superior design and employment. Admiral Mitscher's after-action report emphasized the totality of American victory, while acknowledging the fortunate circumstances that concentrated Japanese attacks against prepared defenses. The combination of radar warning, fighter direction, and superior aircraft created perfect conditions for defensive success against conventional air attacks. However, he warned that future enemies might develop asymmetric responses requiring continued innovation rather than reliance on proven formulas. This prescient observation anticipated the kamikaze phenomenon that emerged from Japan's desperate attempts to offset conventional inferiority. The individual pilot experiences revealed the human dimension beyond statistical abstractions of victory and defeat. American pilots described the surreal experience of shooting down multiple enemy aircraft with minimal effort while feeling sympathy for opponents flying obsolete aircraft with inadequate training. Japanese survivors recounted the horror of watching squadron mates destroyed without opportunity for effective resistance against an enemy that seemed invulnerable. These personal narratives captured warfare's essential tragedy, where technological superiority translated into human suffering regardless of individual courage or determination. The Marianas turkey shoot entered aviation history as a demonstration of American aerial supremacy achieved through systematic superiority in training, technology, and tactical doctrine. The battle proved that modern warfare rewarded industrial capability and scientific advancement over warrior tradition and spiritual determination. Japan's attempt to achieve decisive victory through conventional carrier aviation ended in catastrophic defeat that eliminated their naval aviation as an effective force. The Imperial Navy that dominated the Pacific in 1942 became incapable of meaningful offensive operations by June 1944. The strategic consequences extended beyond immediate military defeat to fundamental reassessment of warfare's nature in the industrial age. Japan's military leadership had to confront the reality that their nation lacked resources to compete with American production capability regardless of tactical innovation. The decision to continue fighting, despite mathematical certainty of defeat, reflected cultural inability to accept surrender rather than rational strategic calculation. The kamikaze phenomenon emerged from this cognitive dissonance between accepting defeat's inevitability while refusing its implications. The sinking of carriers Shokaku and Taiho by American submarines on June 19th compounded the aerial defeat with irreplaceable platform losses. Shokaku, veteran of Pearl Harbor and every major carrier battle except Midway, succumbed to torpedoes from USS Kavala while refueling aircraft. Taiho, Japan's newest and most advanced carrier with an armored flight deck, sank from a single torpedo hit that caused catastrophic vapor explosions. These losses eliminated not just ships, but the institutional experience of their crews, who could not be replaced before war's end. The technological and training advantages demonstrated during the Marianas turkey shoot established patterns that continued throughout the Pacific War's remainder. American forces advanced inexorably toward Japan, while Japanese forces attempted increasingly desperate defensive measures without meaningful success. The carrier task forces that seemed vulnerable to Japanese attack in 1941 became unstoppable instruments of American power projection by 1944. The transformation from defensive response to offensive supremacy occurred through methodical application of industrial democracy's advantages against military autocracy's limitations. The battle's aftermath saw American carriers continuing operations off Saipan, while Japanese survivors retreated to anchorages beyond American aircraft range. The invasion proceeded without meaningful interference from Japanese naval aviation that ceased to exist as an effective force. The airfields on Saipan, Tinian, and Guam soon hosted B-29 bombers that brought strategic bombing to Japan's home islands. The carrier battle intended to prevent this outcome instead confirmed American ability to project power wherever national strategy required, regardless of Japanese opposition. Veterans of the Philippine Sea battle remembered the morning of June 19, 1944, as the day American naval aviation achieved unquestioned supremacy over its Japanese opponents. The months of preparation, training, and technological development culminated in a few hours of aerial combat that eliminated Japanese carrier aviation's offensive capability. The Hellcat fighter proved itself as the weapon that transformed American carriers from vulnerable targets into dominant instruments of naval power. The pilots who flew these aircraft demonstrated that systematic training could produce competent aviators in quantity, overwhelming elite opponents through numerical and qualitative superiority. The lessons learned from the Marianas turkey shoot influenced naval aviation development for decades, as nations recognized the importance of integrating technology, training, and tactical doctrine. The emphasis on pilot survivability through aircraft protection became standard design philosophy. Radar-directed fighter control established patterns for fleet air defense. The American victory demonstrated that industrial production capacity combined with technological innovation created military superiority that traditional military virtues could not overcome. The battle stood as testament to democracy's ability to mobilize resources effectively against authoritarian aggression when national survival demanded total commitment.